it's important to mention that having that career in a business enabled me never to turn to music as a form of sustenance for my family. I never needed to put out an album for Parnasah. I never needed to perform on stage because I needed the money.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we sit down with Abie Rotenberg. Abie is a legend in the world of Jewish music, having written dozens of popular songs over the last 50 years. For example, Acheinu, Kol Berama Nishma, and Lakol Zman V'Eis, and those are just his Hebrew songs. He also has 5 albums full of beautiful English ballads called Journeys, as well as 4 kids' albums called the Marvelous Middos Machine. But what you probably didn't know is that Abie is also a businessman, making his parnassah from his family business until he recently retired. And if all that wasn't enough, he also has published 2 sefarim, as well as a fiction book about baseball and Judaism. We spoke about having a passion which is not your parnassah, how he combines the role of mechanech and musician, and about his love for baseball. Before we jump in, 2 quick housekeeping notes. The first is that next Monday, we will be having our 3rd Shark Tank live event, a lunch and learn with Rav David Lapin in Tel Aviv. For details, check out the Quiet WhatsApp group. The second is that we are entering the summer schedule, and this is big news here in Shark Tank because our rapid fire question about long Friday nights is no longer relevant. So if you want to hear the updated rapid fire question, make sure to stick around until the end of this week's episode. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Shark Tank. So when I started this podcast, I would never have imagined that I would end up saying that I'm in a studio with Abie Rotenberg. But here we are. It's not a physical studio, it's a digital studio, but it's a great honor and pleasure to have you here, Rabbi Abie. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rabbi Yaakov. I'm very happy to be here with you.
So let's just start with a little bit of background. Maybe tell us where you're from. And like we like to ask a lot of our guests, when you sort of transitioned into adulthood and started thinking about careers and professions, what were your early directions?
I was born in New York City. I grew up in Queens, New York. I went through the Chafetz Chaim yeshiva system, elementary school, high school, and base medrash. My father escaped the war by climbing through the Alps to Switzerland in 1941 or 42. My mother escaped from Vienna as a 14-year-old girl and got to England. Although they were refugees from Europe who moved to America, they were not actually in the camps, although they each lost relatives and loved ones. So I certainly consider myself, a child of Holocaust survivors. The shul I davened at was filled with people who had been through the camps. Many of my friends had no grandparents. I had one grandmother. My father's mother was killed in Auschwitz. So I certainly consider myself to be a child of Holocaust survivors. After yeshiva, I taught in Los Angeles for about a decade. I was in chinuch and yeshiva high school out there. It was a community school, so we did a lot of outreach work with families who were not necessarily Shomer Torah mitzvahs yet. Most of the children we had a good influence on, and many of them went on to become that, to go to Israel, to study in yeshivas, and we impacted a lot of lives. When my family grew and the yeshiva was no longer able to pay a sufficient wage, I moved to Toronto, where my wife is from, and went into the family business. And I
And
was
that
in
first
that family business for, I'd say, 35 years. I recently retired from that business.
and that first decision to go into chinuch at the beginning, was that based on your chinuch at home? Did the Chafetz Chaim system push you to go that way, or was there
Chaim
something else?
system, yeah. The emphasis in the yeshiva is very much towards putting your learning towards giving back to Klal Yisrael, being somebody who has enough knowledge and ability to learn and pass that on to others. That was my Rosh Yeshiva's mantra, and something he emphasized all the time. And even to this day, a good percentage of Chafetz Chaim graduates and alumni go into some sort of outreach or chinuch or kiruv, etc.
And going from yeshiva to being a rebbe is a pretty standard transition. A lot of people do it. But then a lot of people, when they reach the stage which you described of having to join the family business, it can be a big challenge and a big shock. Was it hard for you?
So I had transitioned a little bit before. I did work in Toronto for 2 years in chinuch. Instead of high school, I taught seventh and eighth grade in elementary school. That already was a transition for me, a difficult one. I enjoyed high school much more. I also enjoyed working in the community where not only was the challenge to educate the kids in my class, but to inspire and influence them to become closer to Yiddishkeit in general, which was not the case in Toronto. It was a regular yeshiva elementary school where the families were all shomer Torah mitzvahs. So I had already had, like one foot out the door by the time I finished my chinuch career in Toronto. And the family business was with, wonderful people in my family. So it was a very easy transition for me, other than the fact that it's not easy to run a business and to learn a business. So that was obviously took some time to happen.
And can you tell us a little more about what this business is?
It was an import business. We imported fashion accessories, gloves, hats, scarves, socks, those kinds of soft goods. And we looked for customers all over Canada and in the United States. And thank God it was a relatively successful business, and I was able to make a parnassah. It's important to mention that, having that career in a business enabled me never to turn to music as a form of sustenance for my family. So if I never needed to put out an album for Parnasah, I never needed to perform on stage because I needed the money. I chose to perform at certain venues and events, and I was able to work on my hobby, uh, and produce and release albums at my own pace.
Right. So that's a perfect segue to the next part of our conversation. So tell us a little bit about your music. When did you first realize that this was going to be an important and central part of your life and your identity?
So, in my early years in yeshiva, my first chavrusa in the base measures in Chafetz Chaim was Label Sharfman. Label Sharfman, Rabbi Label Sharfman today, the head, the menahel, the dean of Benos Torah in Yerushalayim, a seminary that he's run very successfully and wonderfully for many decades. He was my first chavrus in yeshiva, and he was already quite famous in the small Jewish music world that existed in those days as one of the rabbi's sons. And I happen to have had some compositions which I played for him and sang to him, which he enjoyed. So we talked about doing an album. He very much wanted it to be a little bit of a different style than that which was being released in those days, which was mostly very upbeat dance music for weddings. It was mostly bands that were trying to get work. The Gina Orchestra came out with albums, etc. So other than Shlomo and the Pirchei albums, many of the albums in those days were band albums. And we very much wanted to do more of a kumzit style, shalosh shudas kind of music. And he came up with the name Zveikus, and many of my songs were part of that album. I did the arrangements, and that was back in 1973 when we came out with the first Zveikus album. It was a collaboration between the two of us.
Got it. And so you hinted before at the fact that you were able to distinguish and be successful in your music, albeit doing it on the side, balancing it with your business, your parnassah, your family, your other obligations.
At that time, I was still in yeshiva. In 1973, I was in chinuch up until 1986. And even when I was in chinuch, chinuch was my parnassah. So if I did albums, if I did release an album, it wasn't again to put food on the table.
And can you talk a little more about that dynamic? On the one hand, having the freedom that you're not reliant, as you mentioned before, on the parnassah, and you can make decisions based on your own conscience and not based on the parnassah needs, on the one hand. On the other hand, when it's not your day job, so then the scheduling and making time for it and making any energy for it can sometimes be hard for people who are passionate about their side hobbies, but the parnassah might be more pressing and not allow you the time and space for it. So can you drill down a little bit more on that?
Well, I can only imagine what it would be like for somebody who needs to come out with an album in order to be current and to have new songs and to need that. It's more or less advertising for for their abilities in their career and for the songs that they want to be known by. It's something I can only imagine the pressure of having to do so, because Baruch Hashem, I didn't have that. But I do have friends in the music industry who I know every year or two have to come out with something, and they're under intense pressure to do so. And, I've been successful sometimes helping them and, providing a song or two for other artists as well. So I really can't comment on what that means or how that feels. I only know that I feel blessed. I feel very thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I never had to turn to music to put food on the table. And it's a blessing that if a person has time to learn and come out with a sefer or do something again, and is not doing it because he needs parnassah from it, it's a tremendous bracha.
Right. That is a bracha. On the other hand, people sometimes can feel frustrated because they have these passions. They're so in love with their music or their sefarim, as you alluded to, but because it's not their parnassah, it has a disadvantage insofar as there's not always time, right? You want to put out the music, you want to put down your sefer, but you have a family and you have a parnassah. Was that ever a struggle for you?
Well, I can imagine that being a struggle for people who don't have enough time to pursue a hobby that they love. That is true. Very often people have to take multiple jobs just to get by, especially with the high cost of chinuch and what it takes to raise a family today. And not to mention learn with the children and do this and do that. And it could be frustrating that there's some very talented people out there who simply don't have the opportunity to pursue those dreams. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do both. I have to thank my Rebbitzin for that. My wife has been, very wonderful, picked up a lot of the slack in raising our children and allowing me to pursue my hobbies, without concern. So yeah. If a person is in the situation like I am, you just have to be makir tov and be thankful. But doesn't mean a person should drop more important responsibilities to pursue dreams.
Right. The music that you put out can be very much tied back to the original role you had as a Rebbe. They both are ways of bringing Klal Yisrael closer and more connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to Torah and to mitzvos. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely. I really, really try, with the English songs. Well, let's start with the Hebrew songs. I mean, even the Hebrew songs, you try somewhat to match the niggin to the words. I mean, we mostly write songs that are matched to words. The old Hasidic Rebbe's and then the old Hasidic music and Lubavitch music especially would write a niggin for a niggin's sake, and the interpretation is I guess everybody interprets it differently. There's no focus in that song towards any kind of meaning because it's I did it and it's not connected to specific words. But we mostly write our songs and connect them to words. So you want to make sure that there's a connection between the style of the song and the intent and the meaning or message of the pasuk or the chazal or the verse from the siddur. And in a way, that's a type of chinuch. To me, Shlomo Carlebach interpreted the psukim that he put a niggin to. It wasn't just a niggin that sits on top of the song. It really opens up our understanding of the words themselves, because music has the power to open the heart. And very often, whether it's happy words or sad words or pensive words, it makes no difference. The music gives it a broader understanding, and it opens up the heart to really internalize what the message is. So yeah, there's an element of chinuch even in a niggin, and I would say most of my successful songs were written to specific words. Although Baruch Hashem, there are a few that I wrote the niggin first, and later we found a nice pasuk to connect it to. And obviously, with the English songs, there's a theme, there's a message. Very often, the message is subtle, but I think it lasts longer and it makes a greater impact on the listener when there is some self-discovery in the music and when it's not laid out before them, spoon-fed to them and laid out on a table in a too simplistic a manner. So certainly chinuch is in the back of my mind when I write. And then the Marvelous Middos Machine series was absolutely pure chinuch on Middos, chinuch in terms of how important they are for Klal Yisrael, how important they are for every individual, and that if you're missing If you're missing middos, you may have all kinds of mitzvahs in your pockets, but you're quite incomplete as a Jew if the middos aren't there. So those are all chinuch related aspirations, and Baruch Hashem, I think I was able to, even though I left the classroom, I was still able to continue as a mechanech through the music.
Now, I could hear someone say that, and maybe thinking in their minds, people of a certain mentality would say, yeah, it's chinuch, but maybe it's like not real chinuch. A real chinuch is to learn a Gemara and to teach a Talmud in a shir room. That's one possible reaction. Another possible reaction could be that dafka, the informal chinuch and the broader definition of chinuch is way more important, way more impactful. There's a lot more scale involved in music. Is that something that you ever thought about or wrestled with?
Well, I think both are valid. I mean, certainly the day-to-day chinuch of teaching a child how to read and write and to learn how to study on his or her own, how to be able to read a pasuk or read a Rashi. It's so valuable. It's invaluable. You cannot measure how important that is. At the same time, very much like we say, sometimes summer camp can be more helpful to a child's overwhelm and even relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than the 10 months in school. The 2 months in the summer sometimes are more helpful for the child. So both are true. And very often I'm gratified to hear from Rabbeim and Moros that they use my material in the classroom as well. Very often they'll play a song, they'll ask the children to discuss it, they'll ask, what do you see? What is the song trying to teach? So I think both of those methods are important and necessary, and I'm very proud of that.
Amazing. So you mentioned that you wrote Hebrew songs, English songs, and children's songs. So maybe we'll leave the Hebrew songs for a moment and maybe we'll get back to it, but let's drill down a little bit on some of the English songs. The lyrics are really quite special and beautiful. And we're at a point in time now where there's a very big whirlwind around AI and its writing abilities and its editing capabilities. Do you think at all about the effects that AI might have on the ability to write songs and lyrics that pull at the heartstrings?
I don't know enough about it. A few people have showed me a few little, like type in, write something about this or write something about that. And what I've seen is pretty interesting. There is some creative stuff there, but I don't know. It's too early in this process for me to have an opinion on it, and I certainly don't know enough about it to give an educated answer to your question. Do I think AI will replace songwriters down the road? I certainly hope not. I certainly hope not.
Got it.
Not because it's gonna affect my parnassah in any way, but I hope that want to have the neshama, a real neshama in the song, and obviously a machine doesn't have a neshama.
Right. Okay, makes sense. So one of the themes that comes up in the Journey songs at least twice, maybe more, is the theme of Shabbos, some very beautiful songs about Shabbos. And when we're thinking about a podcast for, working B'nai Torah who have their Parnasah and their Chol, and they have their Kodesh and their Torah, so that whole dynamic takes on a very important meaning. So to what extent did your own personal life and routine and balance of Kodesh and Chol and Shabbos and the week play into writing those two songs?
Well, I love Shabbos. It's as a child, I didn't like Shabbos so much. I couldn't, go play baseball or listen to the Yankee game. So it was something where I felt it was restrictive. My father was quite strict. We had to sit around the table and we had to ask permission if we wanted to leave. I wasn't crazy about this, always that crazy about the Zmiris that he chose to sing, etc., etc. So I found Shabbos very restrictive. But once I got into the workforce and worked hard at whether it was in chinuch or in business. I mean, Shabbos is such a blessing, and it is absolutely a matana tova that Hakadosh Baruch Hu has given to the people, as the Gemara says. Yeshli matana tova bebeis genozi, in my treasure house, and I'm going to give it to the Jewish people. He didn't give it to any of the other nations, so it's really a treasure that we have, and the fact that I've been able to write a couple of songs that give people a sense of what the menucha of Shabbos is and how we should anticipate it and enjoy it is something I'm very proud of.
Interesting. Another theme that we talk about on this podcast a lot, which also comes up in a very small but powerful line in one of the Journey songs, is you wrote a song called The Atheist Convention, and I hope our listeners are familiar, but if not, I'll just give a very quick summary, is that there is a Jew and a Muslim and a Christian atheist on their way to an atheist convention in LA, and the plane is about to crash, and they get saved, and they all undergo a spiritual revolution in that moment. And the end of the song is that the Christian ends up becoming a priest, and the Muslim ends up running a whole big mosque. And the Jew, whose name was Harry, he ends up becoming Chaimel, wearing a shtreimel, and he continues his dental practice in Woodmere, New York. And I believe it was brought down in Mishpacha magazine that a certain Rosh Yeshiva was very taken by that line, because it's a perfect ending to the story in our hashkafa, in our religion, to be a balabas, a Yerei Shemayim, someone who works for his parnassah. So was that something you were thinking about when you wrote that line?
I don't know. I would like to go a little bit back into the song, though, just prior to that point in the song where they all choose to change their lives. That when the plane is in distress, they all find themselves calling out to their God, their respective gods. Peter calls out to his father, and Mohammed to Allah, and Howard to says Shema Yisrael. So the revelation after the plane stabilized and the imminent death was averted, the recognition of the hypocrisy that at a moment of stress and a moment of where they feared for their lives, each of them turned to a higher power for help and for mercy, was the revelation in their own eyes of their hypocrisy. And that's why they changed course, so to speak, and did what they did. Do I remember it being a conscious decision? I don't remember, but certainly a Shomer Torah mitzvah in our community is valued. It is not a stigma. Maybe in the secular world it's less common if a person is not involved in the clergy or in something directly connected to religion. But I don't think it was something I consciously thought of at the time. But I like the observation. I'm very appreciative of that Rebbe who pointed it out, because it certainly is true.
It certainly is true, and it's true about people like you and me as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. The next sort of topic that I want to transition to is, you mentioned the children's albums that you put out, the Marvelous Middos Machine. Can you tell us the origin story of those songs?
Well, I was a father with little children in the house, and children do all kinds of things. And in my family, myself and my wife, we wanted to emphasize to the children the importance of midos. As much as we taught them you have to eat kosher, and as much as we tried to teach them you have to keep Shabbos, and as much as we tried to teach them any mitzvah in the Torah, we tried to teach them that midos are what Hashem wants from us, and that if we hurt somebody else's feelings, it is maybe even worse than doing some of those terrible averas that everybody learns about in school and is cautioned not to do. So it was a strong emphasis on our home and our family. And as a songwriter, I would have these ideas swirling in my head in terms of tunes and jingles, and I determined that it would be a great idea. There was no real competition at the time in the mid '80s for that type of emphasis on an album. There was Uncle Moshe. There were songs about mitzvahs, and many of those songs were midos related as well. Did a wonderful job, the Uncle Moshe songs. But I collaborated with the wonderful Moshe. Yes, he was living in Toronto at that time, and we wrote together and recorded together the first Middos Machine. He later moved away to Montreal, and I took over the franchise and did the subsequent three albums. And we've covered a lot of Middos and taught kids about Middos Alert, that idea that if you're being jealous, or you're being lazy, or you're being disrespectful, that those are not pleasing to Hashem. And we've certainly brought some awareness to the world about the importance of midos. Have we changed people midos? This I don't know. Rabbi Saul Salanter said it's harder to change one midah than it is to learn Shas. So I don't know if we've succeeded in doing that, but we certainly gave parents a tool, and we certainly were mechanech children about midos.
Right. And we've established already in this conversation that the music is a form of chinuch. So in the same vein, Mechanech also encounters dilemmas as to how to teach a certain topic, how to approach it. So did that ever come up in the Midos albums or other albums?
It comes up in all songwriting. No subject is easy. There are various points of view. There are questions how to do it best. I'll give you an example. I have a song on the fourth Marvelous Middos Machine. where the scene is where the children run into to a room where there's cake on the table, or there's only one piece of cake on the table, and the question is, do you go grab it for yourself, or do you let your younger sister have it, or do you let your brother have it? Is the concept of being mavater, of not needing to always win and get what you need. Well, the Torah doesn't say you have to be mavater. Right? There's no halacha in the Torah that says that a 9-year-old kid shouldn't run and grab the piece of cake for himself, so that a 7-year-old sister who's younger should have the piece of cake. So what I'm telling the kid, he can't want to have the cake for himself. It's not a din. It's not in Shulchan Aruch. Not even for adults. Right? There's nothing wrong. A person goes to the kiddush and shul. There's one piece of herring left on that plate. There's nothing wrong with sticking your fork in it, putting it on your kichel. So had to be careful. And the way we wrote the song wasn't that you must do it, but if you do it, you'll make Hashem happy. Be mavater once in a while. That's the line in the song. Not that you have to, you're mechuyev, but think about how pleasing it is to Hashem. Think about somebody else. Think about what their needs are, and be mavater once in a while. So those are some of the dilemmas that a songwriter can have. You don't want to come across too strong. You don't want to emphasize something that you really shouldn't be emphasizing. Even in some of those songs about Shabbos, exactly how do you say those words? All your work is done. Throw away your hammer. Those are ideas taken from to find the gift we mentioned before, that Shabbos is a matana tova. You want it to be based on Chazal. You want it to have some in Torah itself to the themes. They're not just ideas, they're not just thoughts that I had. I tried very often to have, even the song Neshamala, for example, some of those themes and ideas come from the Medrash as opposed to just, stories you heard as a kid or from your Rebbe. They're based on Midrashim. So there has been homework and some effort outside of, how to rhyme it and how to pick a nice tune. So that is part of that process.
Got it. So we spoke about your English songs a little bit and your children's songs. I am one of the biggest fans of Dveikus and some of the Hebrew songs that you've put out. I even once was asked to sing a song on my Rebbeim's house, and I think I chose a Dveikus song, and the Rebbe said that I'm too young to be singing those songs, but I'm an unabashed big fan. I was wondering if you could reflect on the song Acheinu for a moment. I went to NTSY Camp Sports in the 2010s. We used to sing it at Shalosh Shudas, and we probably were thinking about Jews who were trapped and not able to access the truth of Torah and the beauty of Yiddishkeit. And it was in a slice of history where there were no Jewish hostages. And now we find ourselves over the last year and a half, unfortunately, with the return to that awful reality. So what was it like for you seeing that song sort of come back into play?
Yeah, so I saw that in your questionnaire, and actually, I don't think the words Acheinu were ever intended for those distant from Yiddishkeit. I think it's a simple prayer for those who are in distress, captured in distress, struggling with health, struggling with financial things. It's maybe they're far away, maybe they're close, they have trouble getting home. I think the words themselves are more for physical than spiritual. I did write the song at a time when there was an Israeli soldier who was kidnapped and taken by the Arabs, and that was in the back of my mind when I wrote the song back in the late '80s.
That was Nachshon Waxman or someone else?
You know what? I would have to look back. I'm not 100%. Probably it was probably Nachshon Waxman, but I would have to double check that. And that was certainly in the back of my mind. I sat down, like we mentioned before, I sat down and wrote that song to those words, as opposed to writing the niggin and fitting the words in later. So certainly, um, I was feeling, the pain and the the distress, trying to feel the pain and distress that somebody who was kidnapped and taken away from his family would be feeling, and put that emotion into the song. And Baruch Hashem, I mean, obviously, the way the song is being sung around the world today is a testimony that I succeeded in doing so. I consider myself to be a shliach of Hashem. Hashem sent me that theme. The notes, came directly from Shemayim, and I was just a shliach. And when people ask me, what do I feel when I hear the song being sung all over the world and by so many people, my answer today is I certainly would love to see it stop. I would love to see an end to that song being sung so prolifically, and would love to hear much happier music being broadcast all over the world.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the other writing. Besides for songwriting, you've also written at least 2 books, I believe one in Hebrew and one in English. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. So can you tell us about how that came about and how you make time for that in addition to everything else we've been talking about?
So I have 2 sefarim. I wrote 2 sefarim, which are works of Torah. They're not easy reads. They're for people who enjoy digging beneath the surface and trying to understand what we say a sugya, an area of Torah in depth. They're both in English, both of those books. One is on Eliyahu Hanavi, and the other is on Rabbi Akiva. Eliyahu Hanavi I've always found to be the most fascinating Navi in Tanakh. His fight, well, with Achav and Izebel and Hara Carmel, and bringing a child back to life, and having a Gilui Shechina on Har Sinai. Many of the aspects of his life are fascinating. And then, of course, Eliyahu never died. He went up to Shamayim. He's the only person clearly and specifically directly written in the Torah did not die and was not buried underground. From all the Jewish personalities in history, Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. We don't know where, but he was brought to the kever. Eliyahu Hanavi went straight up to Shamayim, and then obviously the exploits of Eliyahu Hanavi after he went up to Shamayim. The many Gemaras which talk about him learning with Tanoim and Amoraim, and many times saving the Jewish people. He is the one who communicated with Mordechai. We just celebrated Purim, and he told Mordechai that Lo Badam, it's not etched in stone, the Gzeira against Klal Yisrael. If you get the people to fast and to pray, you can overturn the decree of Haman. So Eliyahu Hanavi is an advocate and a Melitz Yosha for us in Shamayim, and he comes to every bris, and people have had encounters with him. So I wrote a sefer on him. Fascinating personality. And my derech is to look at the Chazal. I'm not talking about stories and legends. I take Chazal from either the Gemara or from the Medrash and try to analyze them and see what the message is, and to dig as deep as possible. And that's what I did with Eliyahu Hanavi, and the same with Rabbi Akiva, also a fascinating personality. Started learning Torah at the age of 40. First third of his life, he was a complete Am Haaretz, didn't know anything. Yet, he became the greatest of all leaders at a very, very turbulent and difficult time in Jewish history after the Churban. He witnessed the Churban, then he witnessed the destruction of Beitar, and it's just a fascinating life. There is so much of his Torah and so much of his messaging to Klal Yisrael, and much of it is misunderstood. Much of it is understood on a very, very superficial level. And this Sefer delves into it quite deeply and gives a real understanding of what his message is to Klal Yisrael. So those 2 are Torah books,
So
and
may
they're
as well
not
follow up for a second on that.
sure.
So first of all, Eliyahu Hanavi, I love the overlaps between some of the book topics and some of the songs. I'm already getting excited for Shabbos HaGadol and to sing Hini Anochi Sholech Lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi is one of my definitely all-time favorites. And Rabbi
Yeah.
Akiva, also a beautiful song. And I'm wondering on the Chazal of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva was someone who learned after marriage. He left his home for a long, long time. What should we take from that story, that he was successful learning at a late age on the one hand? On the other hand, he did something which I don't think would be advisable to anyone nowadays who wakes up at 40 and wants to take their learning seriously, to run to the mirror for 14 years and not even
24,
20, 12 times 2, right?
12
two stints
times
of 12.
2.
So
Yeah,
what are the takeaways from that?
yeah, you got to buy the book. What should I tell you? That's fascinating. I mean, I would just tell you very, very briefly, for your audience. It's not, we're not having a Torah session here, but he and his wife Rachel were on the very, very same page. She wanted nothing more from her husband that he should rise to a leadership position in Klal Yisrael. For him to do so, starting at the age of 40, he needed to catch up. So you don't go away for 24 years if you're learning from the age of 6 years old and you're learning straight. You went to yeshiva katana, yeshiva gedola, you went to Beis Medrash, you sat and learned. The most any other Tana went away from his family, brought down in Chazal, is 12 years. So the fact that Rabbi Akiva did double that is certainly unusual, and it was unheard of. One of the reasons he did that was because he had a lot of catching up to do. And eventually, we see that he was successful with the extra 12 years. He became the greatest of all Tanoim and actually the conduit of the Masorah. After his Talmidim died many years later, he was the only one. He had the repository of Kol Torah Kula in his mind and in his heart, and he passed it on to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda Bar Eloi, some other Tanoim, and he, without Rabbi Akiva, it would have been lost. So it was really catching up, and that's why it is such an extended and extensive involvement in Torah and in yeshiva. That's one reason. I also suggest in the Sefer that he went to learn by Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania and Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus were the leading. That was the leading yeshiva. When you mentioned the Mir, so if the Mir today is considered the leading yeshiva, Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer was the leading yeshiva in those days. There's a Gemara in Yerushalmi that tells us that for the first half of Rabbi Akiva's attendance in that academy, he had nothing to do with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer really did not connect with Rabbi Akiva. There are some reasons given in the book why that would be so. Rabbi Eliezer was a Shamuti. He was from the school of Beis Shammai. The school of Beis Shammai was much more strict on who was accepted into the yeshiva. I don't think he appreciated the fact that a man who started at the age of 40 was in his yeshiva. But eventually, in the second half of Rabbi Akiva's years in that academy, he connected with Rabbi Eliezer. They became colleagues, and they are bar plukta in the Gemara almost more than any other two Tanoim. So they became very, very close, and they contended with each other and learned with each other, and it became a beautiful relationship. So those are some of the subtle lessons that we can learn from Rabbi Akiva's life. But it's very valid question, and people ask, how did he not go back home? How did he leave his wife? So that's why I say and preface it by she wanted nothing more than his success and that he should become a leader. She saw signs in his personality that he could become the greatest of all the sages, and she wanted that to happen.
That's very, very beautiful. So the other book that you wrote is actually about baseball. Is that right?
So when I was writing the Eliyahu Hanavi, when I was working on the Eliyahu Hanavi Sefer, I remember walking to shul. I'm a big baseball fan since my youth. My father was even though he was European, he learned the rules of baseball, and he was an avid fan, and he got me into it as well. So I was walking to shul, and on the way, like this whole story just popped into my head about a young man who ended up playing for the Yankees, a Jewish kid. His parents are Jewish. They knew nothing about Yiddishkeit, but he got drafted by the Yankees, and he was picked to play, and they needed a place to live in New York, and they rented a house for the summer, for the season, in Riverdale. And it happened to be next door to a rabbi who had a Torah center and an outreach center. And the parents got enamored with the rabbi and his wife and the family. And they started going to classes, and this kid's playing. And so much of it's about baseball and his teammates and the pennant race and what his exploits on the baseball field. He was exceptionally good, outrageously good at baseball. At the same time, by reading the story, you slowly get into the world of his parents and what they were learning, and they started to tell him some of the things that they were gaining and learning in this Torah Center. So it's this combination of a baseball story, a pennant race, a World Series, but at the same time, I weave in a lot of the themes of Yiddishkeit. And basically, it's the kind of book that anyone can give to anybody else who knows very little about Yiddishkeit, to teenagers, to young adults, to adults. Makes no difference as long as they know a little bit about baseball. They will find the story captivating. And Baruch Hashem, we've sold many, many, many copies. It's available on Amazon. It's called The Season of Pepsi Myers. The boy's name, the athlete's name was Pepsi Myers, and $14.99 on Amazon.com.
Yeah, we will include a link in the show notes and highly recommend everyone to go and check that out.
I don't know. Obviously today, in today's day and age, you cannot give somebody the 19 letters of Shamshon Raphael Hirsch to inspire them to come and study and investigate. I shouldn't say nobody, but I can't imagine that a young teenager or a young adult today would have the patience and the intellectual curiosity to sit and plow through the 19 letters, which was perfectly appropriate, in the 1800s and early 1900s. But this story is so much about sports and the games that were going on, that the Yiddishkeit is introduced subtly and under the under the radar. So it's something that if you want to be makar of a neighbor or a friend or a coworker or somebody that you feel would enjoy sports, this is the way to do it.
That's very beautiful and really
And
amazing how you
I should
found.
mention one other thing,
Yeah,
Rav
please.
Yaakov. I was in the middle of writing Eliyahu Navi, and when I got this idea, I put Eliyahu Navi aside. I'm sure he was Michael me, and I worked for a year and a half on Pepsi Myers, and because I felt that's an ace lasos, this is Kira Rechokim, and that if I could bring one child or one young adult back to Yiddishkeit with the Sefer, it takes precedent over, understanding a Chazal about Eliyahu Navi. And I took a year and a half off and focused on this, and then afterwards I returned to Eliyahu Navi.
Wow, no, it's really beautiful and amazing how you found even another avenue to be Marbitz Torah, to bring Jews closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I think that's very, very inspirational to me personally. On the topic of baseball, it came up in this book. Also, a couple of your classic songs, Joe DiMaggio card and the Ninth Man, I believe is the title of the song. And there's two volumes, two tracks on that theme as well. So you talk a little bit more about your relationship with baseball. Baseball can be a very good and healthy outlet and pastime and things to do to relax. On the other hand, we have seen people who can take it way too far, get too over engrossed, and end up really distracting them from their core values of Avodas Hashem. So can you talk a little bit about your personal journey in that regard?
Let me ask you, Yaakov, are there a lot of Americans in your moshav?
And my
There are,
moshav,
yeah,
no, but on this podcast, yes.
on the podcast. But in the moshav, you have a bunch of Americans, or not too
Very
many?
few.
If you see, you don't have a baseball field down there
There are a
in
few gloves in one of the neighbors' backyard.
what should I tell you? I'm a big advocate for children, certainly for young children to be playing sports. It's healthy. It's a distraction. They need something to do. There's a famous story with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky where somebody brought his son to Rabbi Yaakov to ask him a shaila on which hand should he put tefillin, because the boy was ambidextrous. The boy could write with both his right and left hand. So he brought his son to Rabbi Yaakov, and he asked Rabbi Yaakov, what hand should my son put his tefillin on? He can write with both hands. So Rabbi Yaakov asked the boy, "Mit welcher hand warf da ball? What hand do you throw a ball with?" So the father right away says, "My son doesn't. Spielt nicht kein ball. He doesn't play ball, right?" So Rabbi Yaakov, stroked his beard and said, "Really? Then what hand does he punch his friend with?" In the nose. That's if he can't play ball, he's going to have all this excess energy. He's probably fighting with his friends. What hand does he use to punch? And he was subtly telling the father, let your child play ball. They need to let off steam. They need to have recreation. So that's number one. As far as following professional sports, I'm not going to, tell people. Parents have to understand their own children and know whether or not it's something they feel that they should have or they shouldn't have. It's a very, very personal decision that, I, for one, found myself in a situation where I was very much involved in that, and I still to this day follow professional sports. I'm still a big Yankee fan, and it appears in my writing. It shows up in my writing that love I have for the game, and that's it. But I can't tell parents what to do. It's really a personal decision based on their own children, who we hope that they are honest with themselves and see what the children need and respond appropriately.
I did do Chazara today on the Joe DiMaggio card song, and it was very, very, very moving. And I really enjoyed the fact that it came off with a real, true, childhood love of the game. But when push came to shove, the understanding of the trade-off and the ability to make that sale in order to support the yeshiva and the gadol card of Rav Shmuel, I find that very, very inspirational. So I thank you for that.
Well,
among
there's
all the
no
others.
question, 100% that there's no question that from our perspective, the child certainly must treasure and value Torah way above sports and following sports. What that percentage should be, whether it's 90% here and 10% there, or 75-25, that is certainly going to be up to the individual family and the parents. That is the message, and it's also a message about change within our community. How the two children, when they were growing up, it was all about baseball, but how we, children of the Holocaust and second generation after the Holocaust, third generation, look how far we've come from the days, where in the 1940s, where there was very little hope that the yeshiva world would recover and grow again. And look where we are now, 40, 50, 60 years later. These are collecting Gedolim cards instead of, many of them have no idea about baseball, but they have Gedolim cards. So it's a beautiful thing, sign of growth and resilience.
Beautiful. Okay, let's transition to our lightning round. 3 short questions, 3 short answers. We are doing our first interview for the summer clock, and we get these long Shabbos afternoons. So what does Abie Rotenberg like to do with the long slot on Shabbos afternoon?
Well, for some reason, my body adapts. On a short Shabbos, I take a short nap, and on a long Shabbos, I have a long nap. Baruch Hashem, if I'm able to look at a sefer and learn a little bit, it makes the Shabbos more meaningful. Shabbos is the day we get to catch our breath, make sure our lives have purpose, with meaning and with depth. Somebody wrote that and tries a little bit, at least, to practice what he preaches.
Okay, Seed Journeys 5, what a beautiful song. You mentioned you're learning your sefarim, you've written sefarim, you've obviously, looked a lot in Chazal and learned. What's your go-to sefer to find some inspiration, whether it's for music, for writing, or just for your own personal life and hashkafa?
What is my go-to sefer? I love the Medrash. I love the Medrash, and I'm so delighted. I used to look at the Medrash Mavur, because Medrash is very hard to understand and read and get a real clear understanding without struggling through each line of the Mfarshim and this and that. But I love Medrash Rabbah, and I used to have the Medrash Mavur in English. And since Art Scroll came out with their wonderful, wonderful Medrash series, I use the Art Scroll. It's fascinating. It's so deep, and it's so illuminating, the hidden little mysteries and a pasuk in Tehillim and how it connects to a pasuk in the Torah, and how Chazal saw from this letter and that letter and the juxtaposition of two words, and it's just fascinating, fascinating. So for me, it's studying Medrash.
Okay, I have a feeling where this might go, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you had to choose a new job today, any job in the world, maybe something you dreamed about as a kid or something you would always have an itch of doing, what would that be?
I don't know, center field in Yankee Stadium. I don't know, maybe if I could, if what, I actually know, I would choose to be a pitcher so I could, make a deal with them and not have to work on Shabbos, that kind of thing.
That sounds like a perfect setup. Abie Rotenberg, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for sharing all of your beautiful insights
Robert
on
Yaakov Wolf from Nitzarim, right?
the name
Nitzarim
Netzarim.
on the Egyptian border. Kenai Nahar, you should be Matzliach, should be safe, and thank you for being at the vanguard for Klal Yisrael out there. Kol to all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much.
Take care.